I was muted. All right. Hello, everybody. This is the pre-lock show. I'm Bob226 for those that don't know. On this show, we look at the leverage plays, the core plays. We go game by game and talk through guys we like, guys we don't like, things of that sort. Always love getting y'all's opinions too. Guys that you guys think might be some sneaky plays are always interesting. I'll give my 5 cents worth on my thoughts. But outside of that, yeah, excited to dig into this 3 game slate. We have the All-Star break coming up, so no NBA DFS for a week. For some people, I'm sure that's a little bit of a relief. For others, like myself, by the time we get like to Tuesday, I'm gonna be so bored, like, where's the DFS? But it'll be fun. There's still MMA, NASCAR content we can still play around with and things of that sort. On a 3 game slate, I do things a little bit differently. So my settings pretty much remain the same. I don't touch anything here. I use tournament mode still. But I only run 100 lineups, even though I'm still running 150 lines. My reasoning for that, I don't do it on every 3 game slate, but on some like this, I like to just kind of get weird um, and then run lines of 10 for my remaining 50 lines. So, for instance, I would change this to 10 lineups, maybe just take off the Bulls game and run 10 lines with just the last 2 games, and then vice versa, take off the Suns and Clippers game and then run 10 lines that way. I'll also just kind of lock in some guys on 10 lines, like maybe Vucevic and Edwards, maybe Paul George and Edwards, just some unique combinations that other people might have, just to kind of force the domination station to create lines that it might normally not create. So yeah, I get weird. You don't have to do that. You can just run 150 lineups. I've taken down contests on 3 game slates just running 150 lineups, but over time I like to get weird with stuff. So that's just me. Adrian said, "What's up, Josiah? Ready to spend 1 week of DFS budget in one night thanks to the upcoming All Star break." Uh, that's one way of doing it. It's funny. I think I'm doing it the opposite way. Is like once we get to that Friday. Well, I think the slate starts next Thursday, but like Friday, I'm gonna start playing heavy again. So it's gonna be interesting to see how things play out. But I don't hate that strategy. It's a way of doing it. Thomas said, "What am I supposed to do with my days off?" You're telling me, man. It's like I have to go be social again. I haven't done that in so long. Thomas Dye said, "Let's crush this slate before the break." Agreed, man. Agreed. All right, y'all. Leverage plays are interesting. Might not be any crazy surprises. But Vucevic, he hurt everyone's feelings last night with a nice cold snowflake. Zach LaVine did well, so that was nice to see. But Vucevic was not the guy. Does it scare me a little bit that I'm going so heavy on one guy on a 3 game slate? Yes, it does. But there's a few things that stood out enough for me to be willing to take the shot. The first thing was we look at 9,300 Nikola Vucevic. Look at the sim model. Okay, go away, MLB. Uh, look at Vucevic. We look at the sim model. We see a 0.4% chance of hitting 8x in comparison to guys like Giannis, who are at 0, Porzingis, who's at 0.1. Vucevic just kind of stands out pretty clearly among some of the top end options. I'm hoping his ownership might even be a little bit lower, since people might not want to go right back to him after he hurt all of our feelings last night. Giannis is still a great play, even though the sim model doesn't like him. On slates like this, sometimes we just want the raw points. Even if he doesn't have a ceiling performance, the raw points are still fine. So I'm not trying to fade him for that reason. Next up, we can keep the sim model open because the next actual leverage play is Anthony Edwards, who the sim model absolutely loves today on this slate in comparison to those around his price tag. So, Edwards' ownership just keeps increasing. At this point, 50% is 50%. A 50% min by itself is not really a leverage play, but the DS likes him a good bit, so it increased my exposure to him to being around 65%. I don't feel like I need to over tinker this to try and increase it, but I do like this spot for him. This would be an even better spot if Gobert ended up being out, but at this point, who the heck knows what Gobert is going to do on this slate? The matchup against the Wizards isn't the scariest, so it's a spot where I feel like he can definitely have a ceiling performance, so I have no major concerns against him here. Paul George, another sim model play at 8,500. We the sim model likes Paul George stands out a decent bit in comparison to like Zach Levine, Devin Booker, who are definitely still viable plays, but he just stands out a bit more from the rest. So I like Paul George here. The matchup isn't my favorite, but the Suns, uh, out of all of the positions on the team, they've struggled a little bit against the two. They're ranked 17th in the league over the last 10 games. So I don't really care too much about DVP. The low ownership and his upside are just things that keep him on my radar. Bradley Beal, another guy that the sim model likes a good bit. We can just keep going back to it. We have time. You can see here there's a 10.8% chance of Bradley Beal hitting 8x tonight. Those are odds that I'm willing to take, especially at lower ownership. I don't love playing Beal when Kuzma and Porzingis are both healthy, but I'm willing to take a chance on him in a 3-game slate, and usually just when the sim model likes him. So totally fine going right back to Bradley Beal here. It's not something that makes you feel good, but I'm going to do it. The next few plays are FOMO plays, guys that I like a good bit, like their upside, like their spot and matchup tonight, but they're not leverage plays just because of their ownership. It's hard to go double the field on all these guys and still get and still be able to create actual lineups. So Zach Levine, I was not seeing enough of, so I put a 20% minimum on him. When DeRozan's out, Vucevic and Levine are my guys. The matchup against the Bucks is tough. But even with Vucevic, we've seen him have ceiling performances against the Bucks before. With Levine, it'll be a little bit tougher. He'll need to be very, very efficient. But I still want to have exposure to him with DeRozan out. They're going to need to rely on him here in this spot. Ayton, sim model loves. Clippers aren't. Actually, yeah, sim model loves. The Clippers haven't been the best team from a defensive standpoint against bigs. They're not bad by any means. They're pretty average. I say that and I flinch a little bit just because I think Plumlee coming might be able to impact that a little bit and just make them round out and become slightly better, but we'll see how things actually play out. I like this spot for Ayton. He's 8,300. 20% owned. I have a 20% min on him. No leverage, nothing like that, but I just wanted to make sure I had some exposure. Kuzma, similar story. Just want to make sure I had some exposure to him. Not over the field by any means, but I wasn't seeing enough in my last run. Brook Lopez, 6,100. Let's look at him. Sim model likes Brook Lopez, but in comparison to Rudy Gobert, who's questionable still, let me double check that before. I think as soon as I say like so and so's questionable still, we get the news. Okay, yeah, he is. He's questionable still. So Brook Lopez stands out a lot in comparison to the guys around him until you see Rudy Gobert, who's also center eligible, who looks like a much stronger play. But we can play two centers on DraftKings, so I definitely want to make sure I still had some exposure to Brook Lopez because 2.5% at his price tag is not something to ignore, in my opinion. So I put a 20% min on him, which is just around field weight, not a leverage play, but a guy I just wanted some exposure to. Joe Ingles was a guy that I was also just not getting enough exposure to. So I put a 20% minimum on him. With Chris Middleton out, he does see an increase in usage. His minutes should be a little bit more stable, but again, Joe Ingles isn't the highest usage guy in general. He doesn't see a gigantic boost, so I'm not like over the moon pushing for Joe Ingles, but he's a guy that I definitely didn't want to ignore on a 3-game slate. Similar story of Kawhi Leonard, but of course, like a much more expensive guy. On these 3-game slates, I don't really like ignoring studs completely, so I just put a 5% minimum on him to make sure that I wasn't missing anything. So just to recap, like the true leverage plays are like Vucevic, Edwards, Paul George, Bradley Beal. With Beal, we'll talk about when we get to the Wizards. I do think Porzingis is a viable replacement. Like if you really just hate Beal and you like Porzingis a little bit more, I was going back and forth between Porzingis and Beal. But Sim Model's not a big fan. I mean, it doesn't hate Porzingis, like 0.1% at his price tag is decent actually. But there's other centers and bigs I like more so on this slate, so it's just easier for me to go to Beal. But Porzingis is definitely viable here too. But just not the route I went. And that's it. Yeah. So it's really just Vucevic, Edwards, Paul George, Bradley Beal, and some just making sure I get enough exposure to these guys. When it comes to core plays, we will talk about the Bulls and all the guys they have out. Let's look at it. They have DeMar DeRozan listed as out. Alex Caruso is listed as out. Derrick Jones Jr. is listed as out. Goran Dragic is out. Those two pieces, Caruso and Dragic, matter. That's why I'm okay having a lot of Kobe White and Ayo Dosunmu. We had a min on Ayo yesterday. Wish it was on Kobe White a little bit more, but these are two guys that should see more consistent minutes with Dragic and Caruso out. So I'm totally fine having decent exposure to them. The matchup's not fantastic, but they're not expensive, so it's not something that I'm overly concerned about. Rudy Gobert is questionable. So we saw from the sim model, he's in a fantastic spot. He has a decent upside. He's been in better form with Conley playing with him because they have some chemistry. So that's great. But he's still questionable. The good thing about this is that the domination station by itself has Rudy Gobert in the util spot for me in the vast majority of lines. He does show up in the center spot a little bit, but I have a lot of him in the util spot where I feel comfortable enough of just kind of keeping him where he is. And if he ends up being out, I'll be kind of screwed, to be honest, for the spots where he's in the center position. I'll probably have to take shots on Gafford, probably who I feel the most, and Reed, and hopefully, well, I will. It's a 3-game slate. I'll have enough exposure to kind of rotate everything, so it wouldn't be the end of the world if we get that news late. So yeah, we'll be fine. Yeah, late swapping would actually be pretty easy on this slate, so I'm not really overly concerned about it. So as of right now, Gobert is a core play, but it's fine. If he ends up being out far from the end of the world, we can probably actually get a little bit more creative with some of our lines, which we can talk about. Sorry, let's see what everyone's saying. Thomas is like, might have to go hit the clubs up. Maybe actually. It's funny. I've actually had pretty good luck like going out on a Friday after I've been playing DFS and having a pretty good win. So I might try that again here soon. Clubs, not really my thing, but like going out, bars, stuff like that, where you can dance a little bit, I'm okay with that. Darius said, Bob, let's get this money. Agreed, man. Kaboom, good to see you, man. Said Josiah the leverage messiah. Wagwan. Good to see you, man. Good to see you. Hope you're doing well. Austin said, I can't get over it, man. Can we get off Terry? Let's see how much Terry I have. I don't have a lot of Terry. But I do have him. Like, I didn't touch him. I didn't do anything to him. I left him. I let the domination station do its thing. And I'm around 7%. I mean, granted, I made other changes and mins and things of that sort on other guys. But outside that, I let the domination station do its thing. And I only have 7%. And so for me, I'm not really big on like taking a guy out of my player pool when I have less than 20% of him. Because sometimes these kind of plays work out and he might just be like that last piece you need. But he's not someone that's going to be a core play for me, especially when he's only 3K. Oh, another guy who I have on my leverage sheet, who I have natural leverage to, is Beauchamp. He sees, out of the guys who see consistent minutes, he sees the highest increase in usage with Middleton out. So Beauchamp's not a guy I feel fantastic about. He's a relatively low usage guy, but he makes sense. He's a 3K guy. I'm always willing to take shots on these 3K guys and be over the field on them, especially on these smaller slates where you can get away with maybe one guy not getting there if it's a relatively slow night. So I'm okay with that. But yeah, Terry, not my favorite play, but as long as it's only around like 7, 10, 15%, I can live with it. It doesn't feel good, but a lot of these names don't feel good. There's some gross names I've seen people talking about on the Bulls that I'm just like, I can't do that. Overcome Skills said, shout out from Belize. Nice. Awesome, man. Appreciate you tuning in. I didn't know you guys could play. I didn't know DFS was like in Belize, but that's good to know. If I ever travel and happen to be there, heard it's beautiful. Darius said Bobby out there cutting the rug in those gloves. Hey, I'm not gonna talk about that. Austin said I love him better than Terry. He's third on usage rate. Oh, okay. Did you say okay? You were saying man over Terry. Okay, I missed that part. He has the third highest usage rate when Middleton's out. Oh, okay. Maybe let's look at the Bucks. It's the first game on the slate. So this is a good transition. Thank you, Austin. I don't know who you're. I can't get over it. Can we get X off Terry? Ben Terry's third highest on the usage rate when Middleton's out. Oh yeah, okay. I think you're talking about Bouchamp. Yeah. I like Bouchamp a good bit, and I like him more than Terry. Agreed. I like him more than Terry. But again, I'm fine with Terry. I'm not taking him out of my player pool, but I just prefer Bouchamp over Terry here. Thomas said, I think Drummond could be shot with all the guys out. He may be on the court alongside Vooch for a couple minutes like last time. Yeah. I mean, Drummond's one of those guys who can definitely have a ceiling performance. I don't think like that's a silly play by any means. No one ever really mentions silly plays. So I feel like a lot of you guys probably think, oh, Josiah agrees with everything. But if you guys are like, oh, I want to play Malcolm Hill, I'll be like, yeah, I'm just not doing that. I don't really know why you would do that. But you guys normally mention names that are at least viable. And Andre Drummond's one of those. Like, he's not someone that I'm trying to force into lineups. I'm not going to have exposure to him in my initial runs, at least not as of right now. But as I start taking out games and things of that sort, he might slide into some lines, but not a guy that I'm excited to play. But NBA can be weird. Like, weird stuff happens. And like you said, when some of these guards end up being out, sometimes the Bulls are willing to play a little big, which you could potentially see here. That's kind of like coach theory and things of that sort. I'm not an expert there. But I don't hate taking those kind of shots. Let's see what the sim model thinks about Andre Drummond at 3,700. Boop, boop, boop. Not the biggest fan, unfortunately. And that's mostly just because of some of the other value we have on this slate and some of the high upside options. So, like, it's like, why are you playing Andre Drummond when you could play Joe Ingles? But which like in a single entry 1-for-1, yeah, that makes complete sense. But if you're playing multiple lines, I'm okay with maybe like a 3% shot on Drummond or 5% even. But not a guy I'm trying to force into a ton of lines. But I understand the case you're making, Thomas. I don't think it's bad. Dave said, now I have to be a productive citizen in a society during the break. LOL. You're not wrong, man. It's like work. I guess need to hunker down a little bit, focus on that. It's gonna be weird. Austin, nice. Yeah, Bouchamp, nice. We were on the same page. Took me a little while to get there, but yeah, I agree. Why are we still looking at that? So yeah, going game by game. The Bucks. From an injury news standpoint, they're missing Pat Connaughton. He's a starter for them at times. Chris Middleton's out. He's been starting in the lineup. Chris Middleton's one of their big three guys, pretty big name. Jay Crowder's not playing until after the break, and then Bobby Portis has been out for a while. So it's interesting because there's a few viable options here of guys who might sneak in and play some minutes that make the rotation a little iffy. Like Sandro actually has the highest usage rate when Chris Middleton's out, but his minutes are all over the place, and there's plenty of games where he doesn't play when Middleton's out. He has had some ceiling performances where he was able to get to 22 minutes, but not something that I'm willing to bet on myself. That's really just kind of like a coach game theory kind of play. You think you foresee more minutes for him than necessary. But again, kind of like Drummond, like I'm fine with like 3 to 5%, but not a guy I'm trying to get 30% of tonight. That's just a really quick way of trying to lose money. Bouchamp though has more secure minutes. He plays on a nightly basis, so it's not coming out of nowhere. And we've seen him have some ceiling performances at this price tag. So again, we only need him to get like 19, 20 minutes or 20 points to perform decently well. Of course, if he can get like 25, 30 plus, we're feeling really good about this play. So I have natural leverage on Bouchamp. Not a guy I had to force. The domination station liked him naturally. Sim model, what do you think? Bouchamp? Yeah, sim model's in love. It likes Bouchamp a lot too. So I feel relatively good about it when those two things are working together and in agreement. Joe Ingles, as we saw in the sim model earlier, is also a fan of Ingles here. Ingles uh, has been kind of like switching in and out of the starting lineup with Chris Middleton over the last few games. So this should secure Ingles' minutes somewhat. I say that because we can't be 100% certain. He can be a relatively low usage guy, but I'm willing to take the shot on him. He's 3,400, 3-game slate, makes a lot of sense. So that's why I put the 20% minimum on him, because I like his upside here if that shot falls. And I didn't want to have none like I had originally. Grayson Allen's fine. I like the other value on the slate more than him, to be honest. Like, I like Ingles more. I like Beauchamp more. So that's kind of my thought process. I'm fine with Allen. Like, I have exposure to him. I have 22%, but I'm under the field. Giannis is a guy that I didn't force exposure to. I do think Giannis is the best raw points play on the slate. I'm not fading him by any means, but I'm going to be under the field. I don't feel great about that because the other names on this slate aren't great, but that's just kind of the way things fell for me on this slate. So Drew Holiday, I'm slightly over the field on. I'm comfortable with that. I don't love it, to be honest. Drew Holiday and Giannis don't see a major increase in usage when Chris Middleton's out. It's really more so just needing them to have very efficient games, which is possible against this Bulls team and easier with Caruso out. So yeah, Drew's fine. I'm fine with him. We talked about Beauchamp a lot already. Ingles, I'm over the field on. It's weird. I didn't have enough earlier. Now I'm getting slightly more. Totally fine with that. Not concerned. I like it. Giannis, we talked about slightly over the field, under the field, but that's just the way it has to be. My actual ownership by the time I am done, like when I do my 10 lines and just run different variations of that, I will lock Giannis and another stud, maybe like Anthony. I just kind of go off a gut with those 10 lines, so it's hard for me to kind of predict it, but I will have Giannis locked into 10 of those lines, so the ownership will increase a little bit naturally. Past just 24 lines will probably be in around 30-35%, but I'm still going to be underweight on them. Allen, not my favorite play, and I'm underweight on him. I'm fine with it. But again, I still have some exposure just in case he does have a ceiling performance. I'm not going to be straight out of luck. I'll still have some lines fighting for a chance to win. It's going to be a little bit harder for me than the rest of the field who is higher than 22%. And then I have a 20% min on Brook Lopez because I like his upside here, and he tends to be the forgotten big on most slates. So yeah, that's what I'm doing with the Bucks. We can move on. Let's see what Thomas Dye said. Thomas Dye said, when you run the balance of 10 to 30 lines, do you still adjust exposures on each player or you keep it? Yeah, good question. Good question. I keep the min and max exposures I have. Even when I run those 10 individual lines, I still keep those exposures. Really just to allow for more variation in those lines so they're not just the same thing. So yeah, I still keep my leverage plays in there and everything, and thankfully it still runs even if I get rid of those games. So it's not too crazy. Good question. For the Bulls, we have DeMar DeRozan. We talked about the guys that they have out. They have a crap ton of people out. Really just solidifying the value that we were looking for earlier. Kobe White, Ayo are strong, solid plays in my mind. And for me on this slate, don't be surprised if they struggle to get to value. It would not shock me if we're in the fourth quarter and we're like, come on, Ayo, get that rebound, get that assist, make a shot. These are not high usage guys, but they're guys who should see plenty of run tonight, which is something that we can't guarantee in some of the later games because they have a lot more depth. But yeah, really like Ayo, really like Kobe White. Forced exposure to Vucevic, double the field on him. DeMar DeRozan's out. Matchup is tough, but willing to fight for the upside here. Zach LaVine, Just needed exposure. I like his upside when DeRozan's out. Not my favorite matchup, so I didn't feel like I needed to make him a leverage play. Patrick Williams is definitely viable. I don't have a lot of them, to be honest. Power forward's a little bit of a tough spot, but I have him in 6% of my lines. Then I have Terry in 7%. Those are two guys that, I like all these power forwards more than him. Thomas said AO played 43 minutes last game. Yeah, they give these guys a lot of run when there's guys out, mostly because they don't have a lot of other options. But that's why you're seeing names like Dalen Terry, who's like the backup, who can play the backup to the guard spots. Like we see him kind of take control of this offense sometimes. I've seen names like Carlick Jones coming out today as a viable play for some people, hoping that he sees more run. So they might get weird here, but I like to trust the guys that I know will see some run at least. And for me, that's AO, White, Vucevic, Levine, and I'm fine with Patrick Williams and a little bit of Terry. The other plays, you're fighting and hoping for upside and not guys I want to have a ton of exposure to, but on a 3-game slate, I'm always okay with getting a little weird. Austin's like, don't you mention Terry. Austin, I don't like mentioning Terry, but I have to. I have to mention him because if I don't, this is why I like to mention some guys, because if I don't mention him, he's going to go off, and then I'll get like 5 DMs like, Josiah, you didn't talk about so-and-so, and I'm like, hey, we at least talked about him. I had 7% exposure to him. I didn't fade him. So he's definitely one of those guys. Shouldn't ruin us one way or the other unless he just absolutely tears it off. But at least we have some exposure. That's the good thing. A little bit of exposure. But my main guys are Kobe White and AO. Moving on. For the Wizards, they're pretty healthy, which is really weird and boring because they're never healthy, but they are today. I have the Bradley Beal leverage play, which is mostly the sim model play. I'm fine with it. I have a 20% min on Kuzma. I just like his upside, and I don't like not having exposure to him on slates like this. Porzingis is an interesting play because Gobert is not a great defender against bigs that can be versatile. So I was contemplating making that play, but ultimately $9,200 price tag was just not interesting enough for me on this slate when there's other bigs and power forwards I like a lot more. Let's see how much exposure we got to these guys naturally. Yeah, none. Okay, the only exposure we have to the Wizards are Bradley Beal and Kyle Kuzma, and honestly, I'm fine with it. Gafford and Morris can have their performances, but typically is when someone else is out. So not my favorite spot, but if I had some exposure, I wouldn't hate it. But yeah, Kuzma and Beal, only guys I have right now. Little scary, but it's fine. And that's kind of part of why I take out some games when I run my 10 lines, because it just kind of forces in some of those weird Wizard plays I'm not super excited about, and I like to do that on 3-game slates. Anthony Edwards, sim model likes him. Solid matchup against the Wizards. Really solid spot. Better play if Gobert's out, but more than likely he won't be, so just kind of have to take the shot on Edwards here. Probably one of my favorite plays on the slate, to be honest. And he's a core play, so that's good. Hopefully he comes through for us. Rudy Gobert, like I said, has been in much better form in that last game with Conley. So that plus the matchup against the Wizards, we've been attacking them a lot this year. Gobert is a core play just naturally. I didn't have to touch him. The domination station likes him a good bit. Jaden McDaniels is someone that I used to say I don't like playing. I still don't like playing him, but I've been playing him a little bit more here lately because the sim model always likes Jaden McDaniels to some extent. So mostly due to that, I'm okay with just being around field weight exposure to him. I don't feel like I needed to do anything super crazy or different to try and force more exposure. I'm comfortable with the amount I have. Who else do we have exposure to? Yeah, Taurean Prince. I could have made Taurean Prince a leverage play if I really wanted to get cute, but ultimately I decided against it because, in all honesty, I like Taurean Prince a lot more if Kyle Anderson ends up being out. He started last time Kyle Anderson was out, so I'm more excited about this play if that happens. But as of right now, the domination station still likes Torin Prince a good bit, even with Kyle Anderson being listed as N. Does that concern me a little bit? Yes, it does. But the sim model also likes Torin Prince a good bit, even with Kyle Anderson playing. It likes him a lot. If Bootchamp didn't exist, Torin Prince would be one of its favorite plays if it wasn't for Kobe White in them. So I'm totally fine being over the field on Torin Prince when the domination station likes someone and the sim model likes someone. That's usually enough for me to be like, okay, I'll be okay with that. As long as you're not a core play, 24%, I can live with that. And then Mike Conley is very chalky on this slate, and he's a solid play. He was very involved in the offense, getting assists and things of that last time out. The problem is that the value we have on this slate is in the guard spots. So just because we have a ton of White, Ayo, and then Giroux makes a ton of sense, and then I force Beal, I'm not going to see a lot of Mike Conley, and that's just the way the slate breaks out for me. I think Conley's a fine play, but if there's one guy on this slate I'm going to be under on, and it ends up being Conley, I'm okay with that. Not fading him, again, want to emphasize that, not fading him, but I'm like half field weight, so pretty close to fading. Always scary when you're under on a guy, but part of why we play DFS. All right. So yeah, I have a lot of exposure to this game. And the reason for that is because it is the highest game total on the slate. So those two things together help. And the spread's pretty close too. So part of why we have a lot of exposure to it. This last game is a pretty defensive game, not my favorite game to target. But because has the lowest total on the slate, and because it's the last game on the slate, naturally there's going to be less ownership in this game. And it's a defensive game. There's a lot of good reasons for why these guys are going to be low owned. Earlier today, I was open to taking shots on Bones Hyland, Marcus Morris, Terrence Mann. But because of the value we got from the earlier games, these guys are less necessary. If you still want to take a shot on Bones Hyland, hoping he's super efficient and sees more minutes, maybe because the Clippers don't want to run their guys into the ground right before the All-Star break, there's a lot of narratives you can run where I'm okay with Bones Hyland exposure. It can make sense in my head. But outside of Hyland and Mann, I don't really love forcing exposure to the Clippers outside of I keep saying outside from like a value standpoint. Like I'm not trying to get my value from this game. It's a tough matchup and there's just an uphill battle in my mind. I'm okay with some exposure. Like I'm like Marcus Morris, I'm actually close to field weight. Kawhi Leonard I have a 5% min on. Paul George is a leverage play. So for me, in these kind of environments where it's a 3-game slate, there's one game that's specifically going to be lower owned than the other 3. I usually like to try and take a shot from this game. And for me, on the Clipper side of it, that shot is Paul George. You can make an argument that it should be Kawhi, whatever. Sim model likes Paul George more. And also, I like his price tag and lower ownership. So when all 3 of those things kind of align, easier for me to make him a leverage play. I still have a 5% min on Kawhi though because of FOMO. I don't want to miss out if he has a game, a slate breaking game. So I have the min on Paul George as a leverage play, 5% min on Leonard, and moved on. Darius said, didn't the Suns take a decent hit on their defense when they traded Bridges? Yeah, you would think. Let me see. But so far over the last 10 games, they've still been top 6 defense against point guards, top 6 against small forwards, top 6 against centers. Granted, this is still including some Bridges games, so I don't have like the last 2 weeks data yet. But still a pretty good defense. I don't really expect them to become awful overnight, especially in the front court. Ayton's a solid defender there, so it's fine. But that's why I like Paul George, is because over the last 10 games, they're actually ranked 17th against shooting guards. So willing to take the shot on Paul George, kind of one of the reasons I like him a little bit more. But yeah, you're not wrong. That's a trend we need to watch out for, is like once the season kicks back up, how are these teams looking from a defensive standpoint? For sure. And that can be a reason, like, if you really feel like there's some soft spots. I've had spots like this before in the past where the data's not showing it, but I'm like, well, we've seen it. So I've been more willing to take a shot on those spots before in the past. So if you feel like there's a spot there for the Clippers, they're low owned enough where you can do that and still be okay if it doesn't pan out. I don't hate those kind of plays. For me, it's Paul George, but if it's another guy for you, like, definitely do it, man. 3 game slates, or you can kind of play around with them a little bit. Thomas said, I like Okogie. He solidified himself as a good player for the team. Yeah, it's weird. It's weird, but I don't think you're wrong. The domination station likes Okogie naturally around 23%, so I didn't have to do anything to him, but I'm totally fine with where he's at. For me, if you like him a lot, you can definitely increase your exposure to him. But I agree. I think he's a solid play, not like my favorite play on the slate or anything like that. He still has his times where he can be a relatively low usage guy and just do a lot of cardio. But over the last few games, like against Atlanta, he had 44 points, drafting points against the Pacers. 6 days ago, 32 points. Sacramento, 31 points. So his points per game average is definitely looking better. We have 26 on him right now. It wouldn't shock me like to see like 30 or like 31 here, which would make him pop a lot more. I think he would be the super chalk on the slate if we had that on him, which is probably why we're limiting it because there's a lot of good value in the earlier games. But again, we're still over the field on him, so I'm totally fine with where he's at. But not a bad call at all, Thomas. Uh, Aiton. Let's just look at our son's exposure here. We have a little bit of Chris Paul. We saw that he is still alive last game. Um, I am not a very reactionary person, at least from like a DFS standpoint, especially when I miss something and I was not on the Chris Paul play. And I can't think of a good enough reason to really try and chase it again. So, not forcing exposure to him, have a little bit, I can live with that. We're over the field on Okogie, over the field on Aiton. We had a 20% min on him, but now he's around 27%, and that's it. If we knew Devin Booker wasn't on a minutes limit, I would have a 20% exposure minimum on him in a heartbeat. But we can expect he's still on that minutes limit until after the All-Star break, unless we're told otherwise. So unfortunately, can't I'm not going to chase that, but he did still have a solid performance last time out, even though he only played 29 minutes. He was still able to score 44 DraftKings points. Granted, that wasn't a softer matchup against the Kings. So, like I said, I couldn't find enough reason to do it, even though I really wanted to do it. So instead, I put the 20% min on Aiton and moved on. So yeah, that's pretty much what I'm doing here. Madden Data 3 said, how many uniques with such a small slate? I still do one unique. I talked about it at the start of the show. I run 100 lines and then I run 10 individual lines with taking some games out or some teams out that might be really chalky just to get some unique lines that way. I'll also lock in 2 guys in the 10 lines that I'm running after I do my first 100 to just kind of force unique combinations of guys that you wouldn't get naturally. Another way of doing that is, like you said, just kind of increase my number of uniques, but I'm a little controlling sometimes. So I like to know what I'm getting instead of just saying more uniques. But I think that's a fine way of doing it. It's not wrong at all. Definitely viable and works for a lot of people. So no shade, just not what I do. In other sports, I use multiple uniques all the time, but just not in NBA. So yeah, guys, I'll stick around for a little bit just in case there's more questions. But it's pretty much what I'm doing. We can rerun and see if anything changes dramatically because it's been a minute. Let's see if things look different. I'm now worried they're going to a lot. I just saw a lot of numbers change. Yeah, okay, Mike Conley shot up. I feel like we just talked about him and how it was fine not having him as a core play because I liked other guards more. Let's see what the sim model thinks. 5,200, 3.8. It does like him. See how that relates to the other guards on this slate. It just shot Giroux all the way down. Is Giroux even showing up? Oh, let me change that back. 27.5. Yeah. Krugny. Giroux's usage rate doesn't increase, but still a solid spot for him. Conley or Giroux? It's Conley. Conley's the right call. Yeah. The hard part about the Timberwolves today is that we don't really have enough data to like fully say what usage rates look like, but these are the three guys I trust the most. Prince is basically a leverage play at this point, even without the Kyle Anderson news, and we only have him projected for 19 points. Let me look at something and just see what his consistency looks like. Loading. Okay, yeah, that projection's not bad. Definitely over like the last 3 games, and he has like a 30, 35 point ceiling. Not bad. His floor is like 10 points, so that's a little risky, but for the most part, he usually hits that 19 point projection, at least here lately. So I don't hate it. Oh, wow, there was a lot of questions. Are we waiting on any news? Yes, Austin, we are waiting on the Rudy Gobert and Kyle Anderson news. Both pretty big, but it wouldn't shock me if they both end up playing. So there we go. We've said I like to uncheck force a player from the last game on these smaller slates. Yes, I do that too. I uncheck force a player from the last game to a flex position, and I uncheck prioritize completing lineups above min/max exposure settings. I have to uncheck this box if I want my min and or maxes to matter. Kaboom said, "Who's the best low-owned player that you think is a must roster?" That's such a loaded question, Kaboom. Low. First of all, on these 3 game slates, like no one's really low owned, so my mind has to kind of like adapt to this high ownership. Uh, I'm cheating on your question, but I don't believe there's anyone you ever must roster. That's just not how I play. I think Kobe White's fantastic, but looking at low owned guys, Vucevic's ownership keeps getting closer and closer to 22% or 20%, and I have a 50% min on him, so it would have to be him. Yeah, there's almost no one that's really low owned that I'll have exposure to. You can get really, really cute and try and force some exposure to different guys that are low owned, but that's just not the way I'm trying to do it on this slate. Like again, like when I do my 10 lines, there'll be some weird names that pop up naturally by me just doing that who are gonna be low owned, but I don't feel like they're must plays by any means. Boo Champ, what's your exposure? I still have 40%, so I'm still double the field on him. I like him a good bit. I'm not concerned. I like being around 40% exposure on him or double the field. I wouldn't love having him as a core play. That feels a little weird, but I like having high ownership on him. Dave said, do you play players that are 0.01 in the 8X category in the sim model? So yeah, is the short answer. When I first started really taking DFS seriously, I used to look at every player who had a percentage in the 8X column. They automatically became more viable to me and more interesting. And back when I used to study it really, really closely, like 90 to 95% of the players who ended up in the $100,000 winning lineup had at least a percentage, and that includes 0.1. I'm more willing to play a 0.1 exposure guy when they're expensive. If there's like a 0.1 or like 0.2 exposure guy that's a value play, I'm not as interested. And the reasoning for that is because it's much easier for a cheap guy to hit 8x. And that's why you see like 40%, 20% on some of these lower and cheaper guys than the expensive ones. So the percentage really just matters a lot less the higher you get. But when you see high numbers like 1.7% or 10.8% on like Bradley Beal or Rudy Gobert, probably better examples like it likes Daniel Gafford a good bit. I might need to look at him again. Mike Conley, like guys like that means like those numbers mean even more because they're already expensive, and the sim model has scenarios where they hit that. It's just more enticing for me, and usually guys who end up being my leverage plays. It's funny. I was talking to someone. They're like, "I stopped watching your show because I started to understand the sim model." And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, I get it. I get it." OG said, "Evening last moon of the NBA." You're not wrong. What are your thoughts on Gifford short term memory? Yeah, no, I didn't talk about Gafford. I think you're talking about Gafford, but the sim model likes him a lot, and as y'all can tell, I base a lot on what I do with him. It likes Akogi a lot too. Guy Thomas was also on Akogi. I'm fine being around field weight on Akogi, but if I fall a lot below field weight, I'm gonna have to increase it. Gafford, I like to play Gafford more when there's someone out. Gafford has had ceiling performances previously, um, even without people being out. It's just not my favorite thing to do. But I don't like fighting the sim model when it's telling me to do something and play someone that's low owned. The matchup against the Timberwolves is nice. They've ranked 23rd in the league against centers over the last 10 games. What's his ownership? 7%. OG, I think you just tapped and talked me into a pre-lock show leverage play that is yours, OG. That's all you, man. But let's see if we can do it. I'm gonna put a 15% exposure minimum on him. Uh-oh, dogs are barking. I'm gonna have a 15% exposure minimum on him and see if we can run the DS. All right, let me mute for. All right, I think we're good. Let's see. We had the 30. We just put a 15% min on Gafford. Yeah, we had put a 15% exposure minimum on Gafford. So we're double the field on him. I like him as a leverage play here. Does it mess up what I'm doing at center too much? No. Rudy Gobert, it just lowered my exposure to Gobert, who again I like a lot, but I'm comfortable having like around 6 to 7%. It's plenty. Uh, and then yeah, getting leverage on Gafford, I like that a lot. Like solid call, man. Austin said Gafford is pretty good a lot. We'll lean off him considering last night. Yeah, short term memory, agreed. And got into foul trouble. Yeah, like benefit to me, I have a relatively short term memory in general, so I'll forget kind of what happened last night naturally. So I forgot completely. He had a bad game, probably because there were so many games happening last night in general. But yeah, I like the spot. We have Vucevic and Gafford going right back to two guys that hurt us the night before. Fine with it. Nice. Who let the dog out? Good question. Good question. All right, guys. Well, I mean, I think that's pretty much everything for me. I appreciate you guys sticking around. I hope you all enjoy the break. I hope we have some takedowns tonight, so we have a lot to celebrate going in. But if not, either way, look forward to seeing everyone next Thursday for the Tournament Strategy Show. I hope you all have a good one. Peace out. Bye.